The USS Samuel B cut through the dark waters like a knife, her engines roaring as she charged headlong into the heart of the Japanese battleship force. Around her, the ocean churned with the wake of monstrous vessels, their hulls towering like steel cliffs, their guns capable of reducing her to splinters in an instant. The Roberts was a mere speck beside them, a destroyer escort barely 300 feet long, facing down behemoths that stretched nearly 900 feet, their armor thick enough to shrug off her puniest shells. Yet she didn't falter. She didn't turn away. With every ounce of speed she could muster, she raced toward the giants, her crew manning their stations with grim determination. The odds were laughable. One small ship against an armada of steel and fire. But in that moment, none of that mattered. The Roberts was going in, guns blazing, defiance etched into every rivet of her hull. How did this tiny ship dare to take on such a formidable enemy? The team huddled around the monitors, their breath held in the dim glow of the screens. There it was, emerging from the inky blackness of the deep, the unmistakable silhouette of the USS Samuel B. resting at 22,621 feet below the surface. The numbers flashed on the display, confirming it. The deepest shipwreck ever found. One of the researchers let out a slow whistle. "We made history today," he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. The weight of the moment pressed down on them, not just from the crushing depths above, but from the sheer significance of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just a wreck, it was a piece of the past, lost for decades, now found in the most extreme place on Earth. The lead explorer leaned forward, her voice steady but tinged with awe. "This changes everything. We're not just looking at a ship, we're looking at a story that's been waiting to be told." The team exchanged glances, the gravity of their discovery settling in. They had pushed the limits of technology and human endurance to find this, and now the Samuel B. was no longer lost to the abyss. It was found, and with it, a new chapter in deep-sea exploration had begun. The ship lies nearly 2.5 miles below the surface, a silent witness to history. For decades, the extreme pressure and cold kept it remarkably intact, almost frozen in time. When sonar images first revealed its resting place, the clarity was astonishing. The hull, the deck, even the gun turrets were still recognizable, as if the ocean had pressed pause on decay. Experts say the preservation is unprecedented. The depth acted like a time capsule, shielding the wreck from currents and scavengers. That means the damage we see now isn't from rust or erosion, it's from the battle itself. The way the hull is twisted, the angle of the turrets, even the scattered debris field, all of it tells a story. One sonar scan shows a massive gash along the starboard side, likely from a torpedo. But here's the thing, the ship didn't sink immediately. The way the wreck settled suggests it stayed afloat for a while, listing heavily before finally going under. That changes what we thought about the final moments. Maybe the crew had time to react, to fight back, or even to send out a last message. Another key detail is the position of the main guns. They're still loaded, still aimed. That means the crew was ready to fire right up until the end. It wasn't a surrender, it was a fight to the last second. The sonar doesn't just show a wreck, it shows defiance. And then there's the debris field. It's not just random pieces, it's a trail. The way the fragments are scattered suggests the ship was moving fast when it went down, possibly still under power. That's huge. It means the engines were running, the crew was still trying to maneuver, even as the water rushed in. Every scan, every expert analysis adds another piece to the puzzle. The depth didn't just preserve the ship, it preserved the truth. And now, after all these years, we're finally seeing it. The USS Samuel B. was a tiny speck in a sea of steel giants. The Japanese fleet loomed ahead, a wall of battleships and cruisers bristling with guns that could turn the little destroyer escort into scrap metal with a single volley. The numbers were staggering, 46 enemy ships against a handful of American vessels, their combined firepower outmatching the Roberts by a ratio that defied logic. Every gun on the Roberts would have to fire nonstop just to match a fraction of what the Japanese could unleash in seconds. The crew knew the math, they knew the odds. But as the enemy shells began to rain down, splashing the ocean around them like a storm of steel, the men of the Roberts didn't flinch. They were outgunned, outmanned, and outmatched in every way that mattered, except one. The Japanese had the numbers, but the Roberts had the fight. And sometimes that's all you need. Commander Robert Copeland stood before his crew, the weight of the moment pressing down on every shoulder in the room. His voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. "We all know what's coming," he began, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had followed him into the unknown. "This won't be a skirmish or a battle we can walk away from. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected." A hush fell over the room, but no one flinched. No one looked away. Copeland let the words hang there, raw and unflinching, because they deserved the truth. "I won't lie to you," he continued. "The enemy outnumbers us, outguns us, and they won't show mercy. But that's not why we're here. He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the reality to sink in. We're here because someone has to stand. Because if we don't, no one else will. Around him, the crew stood taller. There was no cheering, no grand speeches in return, just the quiet resolve of those who had already made their choice. Copeland nodded, once, sharply. Then let's make sure they remember us. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a tiny destroyer escort known as the Sammy B, was about to pull off one of the most daring moves of the war. With the Japanese heavy cruiser Chokai looming ahead, Captain Robert Copeland made a bold call. He wasn't just going to engage, he was going to charge straight at the enemy, closing the gap to a mere 2 nautical miles. The Sammy B pushed forward, her engines roaring as she cut through the waves. The crew knew the risks. Chokai's guns could tear them apart in seconds. But speed was their advantage. By getting in close, they'd force the cruiser into a tight spot, making it harder for those massive guns to track them. Expert analysis shows this wasn't just reckless bravery, it was calculated. The Sammy B's torpedoes had a limited range, so closing the distance was critical. And at that range, even a small ship could land a devastating blow. As the gap narrowed, the tension on deck was electric. Then, with perfect timing, the order came. Fire torpedoes! The Sammy B unleashed her payload, sending steel and explosives streaking toward the Chokai. It was a gamble, but in war, sometimes the boldest moves turn the tide. And in that moment, the little ship that charged a giant proved that courage and tactics could rewrite the rules of battle. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a small, lightly armored frigate, found itself staring down the barrel of the Japanese cruiser Chokuma, a beast of a ship bristling with guns and armor. The odds were laughable. 3,700 tons against nearly 6,000, a handful of 5-inch guns against the Chokuma's 8-inch cannons. But the crew of the Sammy B, as they called her, didn't flinch. Paul Carr, a young sailor manning one of the guns, later said, "We knew we were outgunned, but that didn't matter. We had to fight." The Chokuma opened fire first, shells screaming in like freight trains, tearing through the air. The Sammy B answered back, her guns barking defiance. Every shot was a gamble, every hit a miracle. The cruiser's shells slammed into the frigate, ripping through steel and flesh alike. Men were thrown to the deck, blood mixing with seawater. But the Sammy B kept firing. Her captain, Robert Copeland, stood firm, his voice steady over the din. "Keep it up, boys. We're giving her hell." And they were. Despite the pounding, the little ship's guns found their mark. One shell struck the Chokuma's bridge, another, her engine room. Smoke billowed from the cruiser, her speed faltering. The Sammy B, battered and bleeding, had drawn blood from a giant. As the battle raged, the crew fought not just with guns, but with wrenches, with bare hands, patching holes and keeping their ship alive. They were David with a slingshot, but in that moment it was enough. The Chokuma, stunned by the ferocity of the attack, broke off, leaving the Sammy B battered but unbroken. Years later, survivors would shake their heads, still amazed. "We shouldn't have lasted 5 minutes," one said. "But we did, and that's what matters." Lieutenant Lucky Trowbridge wasn't just pushing the envelope, he was setting it on fire and watching it burn. The man had a reputation for bending the rules, but this time he'd rewritten them entirely. To get the speed and firepower everyone said was impossible, he'd stripped down the core systems to their bare bones, rerouted power grids in ways that made the manuals scream, and jury-rigged the engines to run hotter than any safety protocol would ever allow. The modifications were brutal. He'd bypassed the thermal regulators, letting the engines run at temperatures that should have melted the hull. He'd siphoned power from secondary systems, life support, shields, even the damn lights, to feed the weapons and thrusters. And the fuel mix? A volatile cocktail that gave them the kick they needed, but turned the ship into a floating bomb if anything went wrong. The risks? Oh, they were plenty. The engines could overheat and fail mid-jump, leaving them stranded in the void. The weapons might draw too much power and fry the entire grid, leaving them defenseless. And if the fuel mix destabilized? Well, let's just say the ship wouldn't be the only thing going up in flames. But Lucky wasn't worried. Or at least, he wasn't showing it. He'd done the math, run the simulations, and crossed his fingers. The consequences were clear. If it worked, they'd have the fastest, most lethal ship in the fleet. If it didn't, they'd be a smoldering wreck. And Lucky, he'd either be a hero or a cautionary tale. Either way, he wasn't backing down now. The USS Samuel B. Roberts had taken a brutal beating, her hull torn open by enemy fire, flames licking at the deck as the crew fought desperately to keep her afloat. The men knew the end was near, but they weren't giving up. Not yet. Chief Petty Officer Paul Henry, his voice hoarse from shouting orders, remembered the chaos like it was yesterday. "We were throwing everything we had at them, but the water was rising fast. You could feel the ship groaning, like she was begging us to get out." The final order came down, abandon ship. One by one, the crew leapt into the dark, oil-slicked waters, the sea swallowing them whole. The Roberts listed hard to starboard, her deck slipping beneath the waves as if the ocean itself was pulling her under. Lieutenant Commander Paul Rinn, his uniform soaked and his hands raw from gripping the railing, watched as the ship he'd fought so hard to save disappeared beneath the surface. "It was like losing a part of yourself," he said later. "But we didn't have time to mourn. The battle wasn't over for us." Miraculously, 120 men made it out alive, clinging to life rafts and debris, their bodies numb from the cold. Rescue ships arrived hours later, pulling survivors from the water, their faces streaked with soot and exhaustion. Naval historian Dr. James Holloway would later call it one of the most heroic stands in modern naval warfare. The Roberts was gone, but her crew had fought to the last, and in those final moments, they proved what it meant to never surrender. The USS Samuel B. Roberts may rest on the ocean floor, but its story refuses to sink into obscurity. Discovered in the depths, this vessel stands as a testament to courage and sacrifice, a steel and iron reminder of the battles fought and the lives given. Protected under the Sunken Military Craft Act, it is more than just a wreck. It is a sacred site, a final resting place for those who served, and a classroom for history. Its final battle taught us about resilience, about standing firm even when the odds are impossible. The lessons from that day echo through time, shaping how we honor the past and prepare for the future. The Samuel B. Roberts isn't just a ship, it's a legacy, one that demands respect, remembrance, and the promise that its story will never be forgotten. The USS Samuel B. Roberts wasn't the biggest ship in the fleet, but when the call came, her crew didn't hesitate. They knew the risks, every sailor did, but that didn't stop them from charging into danger. The waters were rough, the enemy was close, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Yet they stood their ground, fighting with everything they had. It wasn't just about the ship, it was about the men on board. Young sailors, some barely out of their teens, faced down threats that would have made seasoned veterans think twice. They worked through the chaos, patching holes, manning guns, and keeping the engines running, even when the odds were against them. Every second counted, and they gave it their all. Some didn't make it back. Others carried scars, both seen and unseen. But their courage, that never wavered. The Samuel B. Roberts became more than steel and firepower. It became a symbol of what happens when ordinary people rise to meet the extraordinary. Their sacrifice wasn't just for their country, it was for each other. And that's the kind of bravery that doesn't fade with time.